Ernst Barkmann was a member of the Waffen-SS during the Second World War, who later became the subject of debate over the accuracy of his wartime reputation. He was born on August 25, 1919, in Kisdorf, in northern Germany. Like many young men who grew up during the rise of the Nazi regime, he entered adulthood in a society shaped by propaganda, authoritarian control, and expectations of loyalty to the state. His early life was not unusual for his time, and there is little public documentation about his childhood experiences or his family environment. What is known is that he lived in a rural region and worked in manual labor before the war, which was common for young men from small towns in Germany during the 1930s. Barkmann joined the SS in 1939, the same year the war began with the German invasion of Poland. The SS was a central pillar of the Nazi regime, responsible for carrying out its racial policies as well as forming elite military units known collectively as the Waffen-SS. These units were heavily involved in the fighting on both the Eastern and Western fronts, and were also associated with numerous war crimes, ideological indoctrination, and harsh discipline. By joining the SS, Barkmann became part of an organization that operated in alignment with Nazi goals, and his later military career unfolded within that framework. After entering the Waffen-SS, he received training that reflected the organization's particular style, strict, physically demanding, and infused with ideological instruction. Much of the training was intended to build loyalty to the regime and to encourage aggression and endurance on the battlefield. Barkmann was eventually assigned to the SS division Das Reich, one of the most well-known Waffen-SS formations. This division fought in several major campaigns, including those on the Eastern Front. Das Reich also became notorious for atrocities committed in occupied territories, including the massacre at Oradour-sur-Glane in France. Barkmann himself was not involved in that attack, but the actions of the division he served in are an important part of its historical record. By 1942, Barkmann had been trained as a tank crewman, serving first in older models before eventually operating the Panther tank, which became one of Germany's most prominent armored vehicles during the later years of the war. Life as a tank crewman was dangerous and demanding. The Eastern Front was known for extreme temperatures, constant shortages, and fierce battles that often resulted in heavy casualties. Tank crews faced mechanical breakdowns, lack of fuel, and the constant threat of Soviet anti-tank weapons. Barkmann's division fought in several large engagements, including the battles that followed the German invasion of the Soviet Union. These battles were brutal and costly for both sides. As the war dragged on, German forces were pushed steadily back toward the west. In 1944, Das Reich was transferred to France in response to the Allied landings in Normandy. It was during this period that Barkmann became widely known within German propaganda circles. A story emerged that he had single-handedly destroyed several American armored vehicles in a single engagement near a location later referred to as Barkmann's Corner. German reports claimed that he held off a superior force and inflicted heavy losses on Allied troops. These stories were widely circulated to boost morale at a time when Germany was suffering major defeats and facing overwhelming Allied pressure. However, historians have since examined these claims and found that many of the details are uncertain or exaggerated. Allied sources do not fully confirm the scale of the event as described in German accounts, and it is very likely that the story was shaped by wartime propaganda goals. The Nazi regime frequently promoted tales of heroic resistance to create the image that German soldiers were fighting skillfully and bravely, despite the worsening situation. Barkmann's story fit this pattern, and over time it became a part of the larger myth-making surrounding the Waffen-SS. This does not mean that he was not involved in combat or did not destroy enemy vehicles, but the exact scope of his accomplishments remains unclear. After the fighting in Normandy, Barkmann and his unit continued to retreat through France-Belgium and eventually back toward Germany as Allied forces advanced. Conditions for German soldiers became increasingly desperate. Supplies were limited, and morale fell as casualties mounted and defeat loomed. By this stage, the Waffen-SS attempted to maintain discipline through harsh punishments and strict control, but the overall situation continued to deteriorate. Barkmann remained with his unit throughout this period and survived several more engagements as the German military structure around him weakened. In 1945, as German forces collapsed under the combined pressure of the Allies in the West and the Soviet Union in the East, Barkmann was eventually captured. Many members of the SS faced harsh consequences after their capture because of the organization's deep involvement in Nazi crimes. However, Barkmann was able to return to civilian life after a period of detention. Compared to some SS officers and officials, he did not hold a high-ranking position associated with the planning or directing of atrocities, and so he did not face the kind of prosecution that senior SS leadership encountered during post-war trials. Even so, membership in the SS carried a moral burden, as it linked individuals to an organization responsible for widespread suffering. After the war, Barkmann lived a comparatively quiet life. Unlike figures who became involved in public political debates or attempted to justify their participation in the Nazi regime, Barkmann did not take on a prominent public role. Most of his post-war years were spent working and raising a family in West Germany. He did not attract significant attention outside of military history circles, although discussions around his wartime record continued. Enthusiasts of historical armor and tank warfare sometimes repeated the stories that had originally been shaped by propaganda, while professional historians treated his case more cautiously by distinguishing between verifiable facts and embellished accounts. Barkmann's life raises broader questions about how wartime reputations are formed and how post-war memory can change the interpretation of events. The Nazi regime invested heavily in creating heroic images of its soldiers, especially near the end of the war, when the German public was facing destruction, scarcity, and the loss of territories. Tales like Barkmann's served political and emotional purposes, even when they were not fully supported by evidence. In the decades after the war, some people romanticized aspects of the German military, particularly its armored forces, without considering the broader context of the regime they served. This selective memory has contributed to ongoing controversies regarding figures like Barkmann, whose reputations are intertwined with a government responsible for immense historical harm. Despite later attempts by some groups to frame tank commanders as purely technical or tactical specialists, it is important to remember that Waffen-SS personnel operated within an organization built on extremist ideology and directly involved in criminal actions. Serving as a soldier in such an organization did not occur in isolation from the broader system of oppression and violence. Even when individuals were not personally tied to atrocities, they contributed to the functioning of a regime that depended on military force to carry out its goals. This context is essential when examining the life of someone like Barkmann. His skills as a tank crewman cannot be separated from the cause he was supporting, which was the expansion and preservation of a totalitarian and racist state. Barkmann lived until 2009, reaching an age that allowed him to witness Germany's transformation from a dictatorship to a democratic nation integrated into the European community. The Germany he spent his later years in bore little resemblance to the one he served in his youth. Modern Germany places strong emphasis on confronting its history, acknowledging the crimes of the Nazi era, and ensuring such a system does not rise again. Barkmann's long life therefore spanned two entirely different political worlds, one defined by nationalist extremism and another defined by democratic values and collective memory. His personal story remains a mixture of confirmed facts, uncertain claims, and the lingering effects of wartime mythmaking. Though he became a well-known figure in some circles because of the dramatic tales associated with his name, the truth is likely more ordinary and more complex. He served in a powerful and often feared military organization, participated in major battles, and survived a war that devastated Europe. But he also served a regime responsible for massive suffering and injustice, and his legacy must be understood within that larger historical reality. There is no complete record of his private thoughts about his service or the regime he supported, so interpretations of his life rely on the documented actions of the organization he joined and the battles in which he took part. Thanks for watching. If you have a thought regarding Ernst Barkmann, drop it in a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe.